All right. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first presentation in the Rodgers Tavern Museum Spring Lecture Series. My name is Jennifer Pitts. I'm an independent museum consultant working with the town of Perryville at the Rodgers Tavern Museum. The RTM is situated along the banks of the beautiful Susquehanna River in Perryville, Maryland. We're located about 43 miles from Baltimore City and 34 miles from Wilmington, Delaware. The Susquehanna Lower Ferry and an ordinary or tavern was formally established by the Maryland colonial government in 1695 on both sides of the Susquehanna River because of its location on a major overland transportation route connecting the eastern and southern colonial capitals and seaports. The building that became known as Rodgers Tavern was built in 1772 and provided a place for travelers to rest and eat, and for locals to conduct business, catch up on the news of the day, and enjoy drinking with coworkers and friends, up until about the 1880s, when it ceased operation as a tavern/hotel/summer boarding establishment and was converted into a duplex housing unit. The Rodgers Tavern was saved from demolition by the organization now known as Preservation Maryland in 1954. The Friends of Rodgers Tavern subsequently formed to renovate the building with the goal to return it to its 18th century appearance. Placed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1972, it was purchased by the town of Perryville in 1993. The mission of the Rodgers Tavern Museum is to preserve and share the imitable stories of all who lived, worked at, and visited this vital link along an important roadway in America's early history through dynamic, engaging experiences that encourage exploration of our area's rich cultural and natural legacy. Tonight's lecture is a reboot of sorts from last year. Technical difficulties prevented recording of a lecture presenting historic research findings about tonight's subject. That program was made possible through the support of the Lower Susquehanna Heritage Greenway and financed in part with state funds from the Maryland Heritage Areas Authority, an instrumentality of the state of Maryland. However, the contents and opinions do not necessarily reflect the views or policies of the Maryland Heritage Area Authority. The National Washington Rochambeau Revolutionary Route Association Incorporated, a 501c3 partner to the National Park Service's Washington Rochambeau Revolutionary Route National Historic Trail, also provided funding for this research project. The views and conclusions are those of the author and should not be interpreted as representing the opinions or policies of the U.S. government. Mention of trade names or commercial projects does not constitute their endorsement by the United States government. And now that the disclaimers are out of the way, I'd like to remind participants that all lectures are recorded and will be made available to the public on the Rodgers Tavern Museum website and on YouTube. Please enter your questions in the chat box or Q&A. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Robert A. Selig, a historical consultant who received his PhD in history from the Universität Württemberg in Germany in 1988. I hope I didn't butcher that too badly. He is a specialist on the role of French forces under the Comte de Rochambeau during the American War of Independence, and served as project historian for the Washington Rochambeau Revolutionary Route National Historic Trail project. For this project, he researched and wrote surveys and resource inventories for the 9 states through which American and French forces marched in 1781 and 1782. Welcome, Bob.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much. The topic of my little talk this evening is, would the real Colonel John Rodgers please stand up? And the reason why I chose this topic and this title is because in the project in the process of doing the research for this project, a number of different components, aspects, or personalities of John Rodgers appeared, all of which I will be trying to merge into one personality at the end of my talk. You see the first slide, and there's an empty picture frame in there, and that's simply because there's no known project or portrait.
Bob, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I cannot see your slides. I have made you a host for this presentation, so you will need to share your screen.
I need to share my screen. Okay. Share screen. Like this.
Yes, it's loading. And now we see your presentation.
Wonderful. Okie dokie. Here is the first slide. And there's an empty picture frame there simply because we do not have a portrait. We don't know a portrait of Mr. Rodgers. My talk, as Ms. Pitt said, is based on a report I did for the town of Perryville. And just as another disclaimer to start with, it is not designed to provide a biography of Rodgers' activities prior to 1775 or after the conclusion of the war. I'm not going to be talking about his family life, his acquisition of a lot of property in the course of his life, legal dealings or troubles. And it's also not a history of the building in Harford County known as Rodgers Tavern, rather in Cecil County. What I want to do is ask a series of questions or make a series of statements at the beginning of my talk. And then at the end, we'll find out how many of those statements here are true and how many are incorrect. Rodgers was a Scottish immigrant, lived from 1728 to 1794. Is the father of the much better known Commodore John Rodgers of War of 1812 fame. He's a colonel of the Maryland militia. He owns Rodgers Tavern, which is named after him, and he ran the Lower Susquehanna Ferry during the American War of Independence. Now, how much of this is true? As we look at the place that is named after him and that he is most famous for, namely Rodgers Tavern on the Lower Susquehanna River Ferry. And this tavern sits almost exactly 64 miles from the intersection of 2nd and Market Streets. That's in the other direction from what Jennifer said when she placed it into relation to Baltimore and others. Here is an advertisement for the sale of the tavern in the Pennsylvania Gazette, 1772, and it says it's a good new stone house, and it is quite a representative, very impressive stone building that is there. My talk is centered around this building and the ferry, and it is about the history of Harford and Cecil counties between 1775 and late 1783. It is about the political changes that are going on during those years, namely the American Revolution. It is about the military activities during those years, namely the American War of Independence. And it is about the role of John Rodgers in all of this, his public life as a militia officer and his private life as a tavern keeper and ferry operator. And John Rodgers is a perfect example for how these private and public lives of people living during the time period of the War of Independence are closely intertwined, how they are almost inseparable at the time period. So, John Rodgers' earliest appearance in the historical record that relates to the topic of my talk is in 1774, when he receives a tavern license. He is 46 years old at the time in 1774. The tavern is in Harmerstown, which becomes Haven the Grace in 1785. How do we know that his tavern is in Haven the Grace in Harmerstown on the right bank of the river? Because in May of 1775, just a little later, after he had received his tavern license, George Washington writes in his diary that he is on his way to Philadelphia, and I quote, he dined at Rodgers and lodged at Stevenson's. So if he comes from the south, and goes to Philadelphia, obviously Rodgers has to be on the right-hand bank of the river. And because Stevenson's, which is the building that is now known as Rodgers Tavern, Stevenson's is on the other side. His tavern license is renewed the following year in August of 1775 and is valid until 1776. This is the first, but certainly not the last time that John Rodgers meets George Washington, going from Virginia north into Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, wherever. You always have to cross here at the Susquehanna, Lower Susquehanna River Ferry. You always are going to run, at least certain for the time period that we're talking about, into John Rodgers. Now, this is 1775, in May of 1775, when Washington is on his way to Philadelphia. I think it would be an understatement to say that in 1775, in May 1775, there are tensions between the British colonies in America and the mother country, because we know, of course, that on 19 April 1775, just a couple of days before Washington meets Rodgers, we have the battles of Lexington and Concord. And this is when John Rodgers appears again in the public record, because as this entry here says, that Rodgers received at 11 o'clock and sent on from Susquehanna Ferry some news, some enclosed papers, and the enclosed papers that he sends on to the north, that he received from the northward and sends down to the Committee of Correspondence of Hartford, is, of course, the news of Lexington and Concord that had happened just a little bit earlier. Now, Rodgers is at Susquehanna Ferry. Does that mean that he also has the license to run the ferry already? And the answer is possibly and most likely, because here we have a bill that he submits to the Hartford County of Observation about a ferry bill from 1st of July 1776. John Rodgers for ferrages for wagons. This same receipt he submits again in August of 1775, and we know that the ferrage licenses too are handed out or awarded for a 1 year's time period. Now, as I said, in July 1776, paid to John Rodgers for ferrage for wagon loads of arms and ammunition to Stevenson. And again, Stevenson is the one on the other side of the river, where what is today Rodgers Tavern. And since Rodgers is paid for the ferrage, I think it's fair to assume that in 1775 and certainly in the summer of 1776, he already runs the ferry as well. Now, as I said, in July 1776, Rodgers runs the ferry. Shortly thereafter, on the 5th of July, we see this entry. We have a Captain John Rodgers in August of 1776. What happened between this ferrage of the 1st of July 1776 to John Rodgers and here the 5th of August 1776 to Captain John Rodgers? Something must have happened in there, and that is that John Rodgers has become a military officer. But when, where, how, what has happened in a couple of weeks during the summer of 1776? Because by the time the Declaration of Independence is signed in Philadelphia, Rodgers' public and private lives apparently have become inextricably intertwined, because from being a tavern keeper and a ferry operator, he has become a captain in a Harford County militia. With that now, Rodgers clearly has thrown in his lot with the military struggle for independence, with the American War of Independence. But the militia is an integral part of the political component in the American Revolution. The military and the political components of the American Revolution merge in the militia. The militia that Rodgers is in is an extra legal revolutionary, a military force that runs parallel to the existing militia, because Maryland has a militia law, but that's a different militia. The militia that Rodgers is in, as we shall see, is used to enforce the political goals of the revolutionaries at the instructions of the political manifestation of the revolution, namely the committees of safety or committees of correspondence, committees of observation, or whatever they are called, that have sprung up all along the East Coast in those 13 rebellious colonies. In 1775, between 1775 and 1783, Rodgers' career perfectly represents these mergers of the political and the military goals of the American War of Independence. But how did Rodgers become a captain of the militia? Just a sentence to look back a little bit. On the 25th of March, 1774, the House of Commons in London has passed the Boston Port Act. It closed the port and fined the inhabitants of Boston for the tea they had thrown into the harbor of Boston in December 1773. And as the news spread along the eastern seashore, these extra-legal organizations, these committees of safety, committees of correspondence, committees of observation, they all spontaneously organized themselves in support of Boston. And a note in the minutes of the Committee of Observation of Harford County indicates that the first meeting of like-minded colonists in Harford County had taken on 11 June 1774, which is within days of news of the Boston Port Act arriving in Maryland. There's no record of this first meeting, but there are records from now on until the Committee of Observation of Harford County dissolves in June of 1777, namely when the old order has collapsed, Governor Robert Eden has departed, and a parallel civil administration has developed. In the case of Rodgers, we are extremely fortunate that the minutes of this county of Committee of Observation has survived. I think Harford County is the only county in the state of Maryland where we have such a complete record of the workings of this Committee of Observation in the state of Maryland. Now, we know that in December 22, 1774, months before the shots that were heard around the world are fired at Lexington and Concord in April 1775, the Annapolis Convention had, and I quote, resolved that the freeholders and others and freemen from 15 to 60 years of age should form themselves into companies to choose a captain, 2 lieutenants, ensign, 4 servants, 4 corporals, and a drummer for each company. This order by the Annapolis convention to the freeholders that they should form themselves and they should choose a captain and officers and NCOs. This revolutionary decision to arm themselves and to form a military organization parallel to, if not in opposition to, the established colonial militia is a truly revolutionary step that carries far-reaching implications because it's an open challenge to King George III. When Maryland creates this military force that stood outside the framework of the militia law that's in force in 1774. Militia is nothing but people in arms. With the militia laws of colonial America, pre-revolutionary America, you do not join a militia. Under the existing law, you are in the militia if you are between 18 and 40 or whatever the time period is, unless you're exempt because you're a Catholic or you're neutral or indentured servant or a slave. What the Annapolis Convention here says that the people should form themselves in the companies. In other words, this is not compulsory. You join a new policy of the people in arms, and thereby you express your support of the revolution. And that's exactly what Rodgers does. He not only joins the revolution, but he even becomes a captain of a militia company. Because the Committee of Observation in Hartford, in turn, resolved in December of 1774, and I quote, that notice be given to the freeholders and freemen of Hartford County who are lovers of liberty, and they are hereby requested to give their attendance at Hartford Town the 3rd of January next, namely January 1774, to consider of some general plan of forming themselves into companies agreeable to the resolve of the Provincial Congress. In other words, in December 1774, the first companies of this revolutionary militia form in Hartford County. And by February 1775, the movement to create militia companies is countywide. This is all months before Lexington and Concord, which is in April of 1775. And that's a year and a half before the Declaration of Independence, which is on the 4th of July, 1776. However, as soon as these militia companies and the militia organization is coming on the way and coming into being, the political component of this militia organization appears as well, because the committee resolved on January 1775, which is, again, within 3 weeks of the freeholders, the lovers of liberty, having been asked to form themselves into a militia. This committee resolved, and I quote, a number of citizens be appointed to collect contributions for the relief of the poor of Boston. That's the Boston Port Act, of course. And also to collect money for the purchase of arms and ammunition for the defense of our lives, liberties, and properties. End of quote. But collecting of funds offered an opportunity to test the political leanings of the people living in the state, because as they went from house to house to collect funds, and I quote again, the collectors are also to make a return of such men, if any, who dead to every feeling of humanity and to all sense of their own danger, refuse to give anything to either of the above purposes. And there you have it. The militia goes around, collects money, and puts down the names of who does not give anything and who obviously is not a lover of liberty, but opposed to whatever's going on months before the Lexington and Concord, a year and a half before the Declaration of Independence. The revolutionary spirit, in other words, is well and alive in Maryland long before Lexington and Concord. And I think this is a great example to show that we need to get away from thinking that the Revolutionary War, revolutionary unrest happened at Lexington and Concord, Valley Forge and Yorktown. The grievances, the groundwork for all of this has been laid and was growing for months already before the sparks happened to get this revolution going. And then, as I said, comes Lexington and Concord, April 1775, and the 14th June 1775, the Second Continental Congress appoints George Washington commander-in-chief. And it is while he is on his way to Philadelphia that Washington in May 1775 crosses at the Susquehanna Ferry and dines with Rodgers and then lodges at Stevenson's in the building that is today's Rodgers Tavern. In August 1775, the Maryland Council of Safety now orders, and I quote again, that all free male persons, hired servants and apprentices exempted between the ages of 16 and 50, shall, by the commanding officer of the county, be enrolled or formed into companies before the 15th day of September 1775. Something important has happened there, because from the initial request that people should form themselves, that happened in December of 1774, now in August of 1775, all free male persons shall be enrolled. The compulsion is there again. In other words, the revolutionaries feel already strong enough to compel, to order all lovers of liberty to join this militia before the 15th of September of 1775. And on the 12th of September 1775, Harford County holds a meeting in accordance with the order of the Provincial Assembly to enroll in a militia, because they're supposed to do this before the 15th of September. And voila, here's our John Rodgers, captain of company number 5. Rodgers is now a militia officer, and while we don't know when, during what point during the spring or summer of 1775, Rodgers had begun to recruit his company, but in September of 1775, it is obviously large enough to be embodied as a captain. We have a first lieutenant, a second lieutenant, we have an ensign, and we have 68 privates. We don't know why Rodgers company became number 5. It's not because of when they're reviewed. Companies number 1, 2, and 3 are reviewed after Rodgers' company. Somehow he ended up with number 5. What is important, however, I think, is that the men who enrolled, maybe during a meeting at his tavern, had enough confidence in Rodgers to elect him their captain and make him their commanding officer. A few months later, in January 1776, Maryland has established 38 numbered and 16 unnumbered militia battalions and Rodgers' company becomes part of the 23rd Battalion, the Upper All Halls Battalion of Militia, with Aquila Hall as colonel. This is January 1776, when Maryland is already organized into 38, 48, 54 militia battalions. The whole state is militarily organized 7 months before the Declaration of Independence. And now, for the next 3 years, between September 1775 and the spring of 1778, Rodgers appears at various intervals in the public record as an officer commanding his company and as what we might call an enforcer of revolutionary ideals, of an enforcer of adherence to the American Revolution. Because in September 1775, within days of his having been appointed captain or chosen captain, he appears in the records of the Committee of Observation when the committee, and I quote, is to proceed to nominate and appoint the following persons in the hundreds to carry the association framed and resolved upon the last convention to all freemen resident in the said county of Hartford, and to require their subscription and to return to the committee those who do not sign. In other words, now Rodgers is, and his company is, one of the people tasked with, again, checking in on the people living in the county and making sure they are supporters of the revolution. And his name appears, he appears by name in this resolve, in this order of September of 1775. Those people who do not sign this association, by the way, are called non-associators. And if you ever have the time or interest to go through the minutes of the Committee of Observation, which were published in the 1860s already, you will see that this committee in Hartford County doesn't give you a lot of option. You're either for us or against us. And if you're against us, we're going to take your guns away, first of all, and we're going to do everything to confiscate your property. And that includes ministers who dare to pray for the king of the pulpit. They pull them down. There's either or. There's no gray scale in all of this. This Association of Freemen of Maryland signs in this association, we put it differently, this document that the people are supposed to sign states, and I quote, that we, the inhabitants of the province of Maryland, firmly persuaded that it is necessary and justifiable to repel by force, to approve of the opposition by arms to the British troops employed to enforce obedience to delayed acts and statutes of the British Parliament. In other words, this is July 1775, and the revolutionaries in Maryland already say, if we have to go to war and repel force by force, we're ready to do this, and it's totally justifiable. Bring it on, British Crown. We are ready for you. And as I said, Rodgers' name appears numerous times in 75, 76, and early 1777. Initially, we know that the war is more farther up north, but then in August of 1777, ground forces, British forces under Sir William Howe, landed Plum Point on the Elk River. And if you're local there, you all know where that is. Plum Point landing is, right across from Cecil Courthouse, almost, if you say, as you see on this map. Sir William Howe is landing, and is Rodgers' company, militia company, now deployed? You bet it, because now the military role of being a captain of a militia company appears. There are a number of bills of ration for John Rodgers' company. I should have just showing some for September of 1777. His company is on duty because British forces are in the neighborhood. Here's another one received for Captain John Rodgers, 15th of September. The contents of this bill in barrels of cider, 1 sheep, etc. 17-year-old militiaman by the name of Aaron McComas deposed in his pension application that he entered the service of the United States in the month of October in the year 1777 as a private in the company commanded by Captain John Rodgers, which company was attached, belonged to the battalion of regiment commanded by Colonel Francis Holland, and that he left the said service and was verbally discharged the first tour in the latter part of the month of May 1778. In other words, if he enters in October of 77 and serves until May of 1778, that's a 9-month tour. And do we have the right man? Absolutely, because McComas says he served under Captain John Rodgers, father of Commodore Rodgers of War of 1812 fame. We've got the right person. We've got the right Captain John Rodgers. Now, this is May of 1778, and I think his discharge in May of 1778 is because the 23rd Battalion of Militia of Harford County is recommissioned in April of 1778. But Colonel John Rodgers is still in here. Rodgers is still the captain. We got different first and second lieutenants and ensigns. They have changed. But Rodgers gives Captain Francis Holland, and the 23rd Battalion, Harford County, is still there. They are still there. But something else happened in June of 1778. That is that the last debts owed to Rodgers are paid off. And there's a list of accounts that runs from August 1776, shows that Rodgers is paid off on 17 June 1778. And after this 17 June 1778, the name of John Rodgers disappears from Harford County records, as well as from statewide compilations curated for submission to the federal government in the 1790s. Why is that? Because sometime in the fall of 1778, maybe the summer of 1788 more likely, Rodgers has moved out of Harford County into Cecil County and now holds the license for the tavern that we call Rodgers Tavern. And with this move, his commission as a captain in the 23rd Battalion of the Harford County Militia seems to have become mute, seems to have become dormant. Once he lives in Cecil County, he has no company to command anymore, which means that after 3 years of active military and political duty in the service of the American Revolution, he is a civilian again. He has a license for what's today Rodgers Tavern on 6 October 1780. The county renews his tavern license for another year to keep the Tavern at least until the end of September 1781. In an award for June 1781, he is referred to as, and I quote, now in Cecil County, Susquehanna Ferry. A few months later, Allied forces on their way to Yorktown reach the Susquehanna Ferry, reach John Rodgers Tavern, and the ferry experiences by far its busiest days ever. And with that, the life and times of Captain John Rodgers enters a new phase. Now, we don't have time to go Lafayette is there in the spring of 1781. Let's go to Washington and Rochambeau and the Yorktown campaign. We know that French forces under the Comte de Rochambeau arrive in Newport in July 1780. They winter in Rhode Island and in Connecticut, 1780-81. In June of 1781, they march to Greenburgh in Westchester County, New York. The decision to deploy to Yorktown is made on the 14th of August, and by the 18th of August, the Allied forces are on their way. And the first units of the Continental Army reach Head of Elk on the 6th of September, 1781. On the 7th September, the 1st French Brigade. On the 8th of September, the 2nd French Brigade joins them. And now we have about 7,000 American and French troops encamped at Head of Elk. We know that Washington had hoped to find a sufficient number of watercraft assembled at Head of Elk to transport his troops to Virginia, but his needs far surpass the resources available. There are only about 12 sloops and 18 schooners that are waiting, which means that all in all, about 3,000 French troops and about 1,000 Continental Army forces, more than half of all Allied troops, plus the campaign artillery, plus the wagon train, etc., received orders to continue on land for Baltimore. This column, which leaves Head of Elk and now is making its way to Baltimore, has to cross the Susquehanna River at Rodgers Tavern. This column consists of at least 300 wagons drawn by 6 oxen each, which makes it more than 1,800 oxen. It consists of at least another 1,500 horses, because we know that from Annapolis onward, there are 1,500 horses that walk their way to Williamsburg and Yorktown. The horses that are pulling the artillery pieces. There are at least 400 horses for the Hussars of Lauzon's Legion, officers, servants, etc. In other words, it wouldn't be an understatement to say that the 4,000 troops are accompanied by 4,000 large animals. And I can tell you where I would want to walk in that column. That this is not just a guesstimate, I think is confirmed in an order by the council in Annapolis, which instructs Mr. George at Georgetown in an order that says that it will be absolutely necessary to collect immediately at Georgetown a quantity of forage sufficient for 3,000 horse and oxen on their way to Virginia with artillery and heavy baggage. And that is after close to 1,000 animals and wagons have been discharged at Annapolis, who are making their way back to New England. The columns, in other words, that are entering Maryland and are on their way to Lower Susquehanna Ferry are huge and put an enormous strain on the resources of the state and Susquehanna Ferry, which is by far not prepared for all these people. Because here's an 18th century drawing by Benjamin Latrobe that shows the Susquehanna Ferry. You see the ferry. You think how long it's going to take to get 4,000 large animals across here, and close to 4,000 people. That means, of course, that the hussars of Lauzon's Legion, the artillery, all the wagons have to take a detour, and they take a detour via Baldfriars Ferry. It's easier for the Continental Army. There are only about 850 to 900 Continental Army troops, and Josiah Atkins of Farmington writes, and that it took all night to cross the Susquehanna River with the men and the wagons, but eventually they make it across in what must have been an extremely busy night for the ferrymen and their helpers. Then September 1781, Continental Army crosses the Susquehanna and then camps somewhere over here. This map by Simon de Witt of literally September 1781, shows the crossing, and it's probably the oldest or the earliest map showing John Rodgers' Tavern here on the right-hand side, and then the ferry crossing, and there's Daniel Durbin's Tavern on this side of the crossing. As I said, the wagons, the majority of the wagons and the horses, etc., take these detour by Cummings Tavern at Baldfriars Ford and Ferry. Here's Deer Creek Church is still standing. It's a Quaker meeting house, and then you come down toward Bush Town. Now that's historic marker there today where that encampment was. And here's his Cumming Taverns, and the tavern is also still standing with the historic marker that Count de Rochambeau's heavy artillery and baggage crossed here. Do we have any other proof that they actually crossed here? Yes, we do, because usage of the ferry is not free. Crossing the Susquehanna at Baldfriars Ferry, and I don't know if you can see this here, Baldfriars Ferry, September 11th, 1781, costs, this is one of them, £3, 4 shillings. These receipts, there's a whole stack of those in the Jeremiah Wadsworth papers that are held in the Connecticut Historical Society in Hartford, Connecticut, because Jeremiah Wadsworth and John Carter are the sole suppliers of French forces and the organizers of this march as far as ferries and food and firewood, etc., is concerned. And they keep records because they want to be reimbursed by by Rochambeau, of course, with a nice cut for themselves. And it is through these bills that we know not only which ferries they used, but also how many people, how many animals crossed, and how much it cost. Because here's Mr. John Rodgers. He presents his bill for 2,500 men, and that's an approximation. When they crossed over 2 days, they didn't count every man individually, but only 120 wagons and 10 horses, 16 oxen. And here we see that the rest clearly used the detour through via Baldfriars Ford and Ferry. £75, 6 shillings, and Jeremiah Wadsworth and the French paid in gold and silver. They paid in cash, and that must have been like a warm rain coming down on Maryland, on John Rodgers, after years of getting pretty much worthless IOUs, continental paper money. With this 75 pounds, Rodgers could have purchased probably 50 sheep. It was a nice income for a day or 2 days worth of work. They paid, as I said, in gold and silver, and French gold and French silver coins are in the center row, as you can see. British currency, sixpence, shillings, half crowns at the top row, and the bottom row is Spanish silver. And when you look at them, what is very obvious is that they're all the same size, weight, and pretty much silver content, which is wonderful because you can even, at the top right, you have a German Reichsthaler. You can even use that. It doesn't matter which king or emperor or symbol or coat of arms is on these coins. They're all worth the same, which is why, French livres are like the ones spent by Rochambeau, are legal tender in the United States until 1859, simply because it is silver and will be accepted no matter where you go. We know that these forces are on the way down to Yorktown. There's the victory in Yorktown in October 1781. Continental Army marches north in November, December 1781. French forces come in 1782. Here, before we get to 1782, real quick, another map that shows the crossing of French forces on the 9th and 10th of September of 1781. Here's Garrett Island, see the river, we see Rogers Tavern, Broad Street, Mill Creek Road, and the encampment on the other side in Haver the Grace. There's actually a historic marker there in Haver the Grace too that shows the encampment of French forces there. Here's a couple drawings, contemporary drawings of Rochambeau's infantry, as well as Rochambeau's artillery, Lauzon's Legion, the Hussar, and artillery ouvriers. On 1781, however, something else happened. Right as French forces and Allied forces are leaving New York State, the encampment at Westchester County, Greenburg, for some reason, and I'm not sure what exactly happened, but sometime during the summer of 1781, John Rodgers resumes his military career. We know that sometime in the fall of 1778, Rodgers had moved from Harford County into Cecil County, and in August 1779, at the latest, held this license for Rogers Tavern. I also said earlier that with the move, his commission as a captain in the 5th Company, 23rd Battalion, renewed in April 1778, seems to have become dormant. But now, in the journal correspondence of the State Council of Maryland, we see this entry, namely that Colonel Aquila Paca will apply with a list of officers wanting for the 23rd Battalion of Militia of this county, and Your Excellency will please to order such commissions as will apply to be made out for Aquila Paca, Colonel John Rodgers, Lieutenant Colonel, and Samuel Smith. Now, this information was discovered by Miss Pitts, who just so kindly introduced me, because a couple months ago, she found this envelope, this letter of October 1781, addressed to Lieutenant Colonel John Rodgers sometime in October 1781. After I had completed my report a year and a half ago, I had not found any information about Rodgers' military career after 1778. But, Jennifer was determined not to let Rodgers enter history as a mere captain, and she kept on digging, and she found this envelope in the Chancery records, and then backtracked Rodgers and what had happened to this order of December of to June of 1781, and I hope Colonel Rodgers is eternally grateful for this. And I'll be the first to admit that this is really this is really due to a large degree to the work that Jennifer did. Be that as it may, when French forces returned in 1782, Rodgers is a lieutenant colonel of the Harford County Militia. How did this happen? The explanation that I have, and Jennifer agreed, is that even though Rodgers is in Cecil County, he still owns a large amount of land in Harford County. And as a property owner in Harford County, he qualifies for a militia commission, even as lieutenant colonel, the second highest commission in the militia of the county. And that's why he receives that commission. He is an important personality. He's well known. He has military experience, and he is a property owner in Harford County. And that's why he gets this commission and holds his commission in 1782 and for another 2 or 3 years. Again, here's some maps of the return march of French forces, and you see, Rodgers Tavern and the encampment of the infantry near Mill Creek Road in the artillery is on the right hand side of the road. Here again is a different map. This map is part of a manuscript that's out at the Huntington Library. Now, we're in 1782. In 1783, the War of Independence is over. Moving back and forth across the river, George Washington, on his way home from the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, September 1781, crossed the Susquehanna and dined in Havre de Grace at the house of one Rodgers. Now Rodgers seems to have moved to the other side of the river, but is still running a tavern over there. When he died on the 10th of April, 1794, and is buried in White Clay Creek Cemetery, Newcastle County, Delaware, the Scottish immigrant, I think we can say, had done very well for himself. What do we know about him at the moment of his death? He was a Scottish immigrant. The date and circumstances of his immigration are unknown. He lived from 1728 to 1794. He's the father of the famous Commodore John Rodgers. He was a captain in the 5th Company, lieutenant colonel of the 23rd Battalion. He does not own Rodgers Tavern, even though it is generally known as Rodgers Tavern, and he ran the Lower Susquehanna Ferry for the War of Independence. His commission as a lieutenant colonel expires because with the start of the first session, the Maryland Assembly, 5 November 1785, the Militia Act expired, was not renewed. Yet a few months later, in 18 May 1786, Colonel John Rodgers of Harford County receives land in Cecil County, though by now I think this appellation has become honorary. So what was he up to? Well, as we know, in the summer of 1774, political unrest had swept across the colonies. Rodgers does not stand aside for very long. We don't know why he chose the side of the supporters of independence, maybe his Scottish background. Ethnicity influenced his decision. He's very active militarily. He's active in politically enforcing the political goals of the revolution. And when he dies in April 1794, he's buried in White Clay Creek Cemetery, as I said, and he dies as a very wealthy man. And I think we can say that the Scottish immigrant has done very well for himself. Thank you very much. Boy, I talked for a long time.
Well, thank you very much, Bob, for presenting this lecture for a second time with a few updates. You're very kind to share your time with us today. And I'm going to throw the floor open to see if anyone had any questions for Dr. Selig or any questions about John Rodgers. I think between the two of us, we might be able to answer one or two. So while you're all thinking, Bob, I actually had a couple of questions. Did other states mobilize their militias as early or as extensively as Maryland did?
Yeah, I think we see these committees of observation, committees of safety up and down the East Coast. While the Boston Tea Party is the most famous Tea Party, we have these tea parties up and down the East Coast, all the way down to Charleston. We have it in Annapolis. This fervor is up and down the East Coast. We just have this wonderful situation in Harford County that the minutes of the Committee of Safety are out there. We see exactly what they are doing, whom they are targeting, how political goals and military mobilization go hand in hand. I think for Maryland, it's the only county where we have all of these records, but it's not unique. We just at least I know more about Harford County than about any other county on the East Coast.
Okay. So we have a couple of questions in the Q&A. First one is, do you know if Loyalist sentiment was strong in Cecil and Harford counties?
There are Loyalists there, and for Harford County, we know quite a few of the names because their names appear in the minutes of the Committee of Observation. I don't know. But I don't know how strong that really was. The governor of Maryland, Eden, didn't put up a lot of resistance. He's very quiet. He leaves the state without much ado. And once the governor, the head of the royal administration, is not there for resistance to coalesce around, I think that takes a lot of the backbone out of the Loyalist sentiment.
Our next question is, was it Rodgers, spelled R-O-D-G-E-R-S, or Rogers, spelled without the D? I see both of these spellings in the documents you presented. Is Rogers with a D the correct spelling?
I don't know that in the 18th century there's such a thing as correct spelling. John Knox once said he had no respect for anybody who only knows one way of spelling a word. So it's usually spelled with a D, but you will see it also without the D, just Rogers, which I think they do that to add confusion because there are also Rodgers in Maryland without the D in there. Right now, I think and I think the town of Perryville also spells it with a D usually, but you will see it without the D as well.
Yeah, with the signatures that I've seen for John and for his wife Elizabeth, they spell it with a D. I don't think I've seen their signatures spelling it Rogers. There's always a D with it. So I'm inclined to take their word for it.
Yeah.
But yes, you are absolutely right. There are spelling variations. Okay. Our next question is, did Washington take a boat south from Elk, or did he march with Rochambeau and troops through Cecil and Hartford in September of 1781?
Neither Washington nor Rochambeau took a boat down to Virginia. They didn't even wait for the troops to embark. Washington rode ahead to Baltimore. He stayed overnight in Baltimore, and from Baltimore went straight for Mount Vernon. But he took went through Marlborough, through Annapolis that way, then crossed the Potomac to Mount Vernon, while Rochambeau took the land route all the way to Mount Vernon. At this point, there's not much Washington or Rochambeau can do. The troops are making their way down to Virginia. The officers will go at their own pace, at their own routes, at their own directions on all the way to Virginia. Washington, in case of Washington in particular, he hadn't been to Mount Vernon since the summer of 1775. He hadn't been home for 6 years. He is anxious to get home. He also wants to prepare everything for Rochambeau and Châteauroux and French forces to get there. And they are down in Williamsburg almost a week before their forces get there. So long story short, no, they did not take a boat.
Okay. All right, our next question is, were there enslaved people at Rodgers Tavern? If you don't mind, Bob, I'll answer this one. Yes, there were. When Rodgers died in April of 1794, an inventory of his estate was taken. This was common practice for everyone who died, whether you left a will or not. And we have 7 enslaved listed in his inventory. They were Milky, age 5, Will, age 36, Ben, age 30, Isaac, 20 years old at the time, Bob was 18, Welton, 16, and Grace was 14 years old. And we are working to uncover more about them. Okay. Comment, census takers were notorious for misspelling names. I'm not going to argue with that one.
Yeah. And the other question up there, how may we obtain a copy of the recording? Again, that's for you.
Yes, that is for me, and it will be made available on the museum's website and on our YouTube channel. So, Bob, I am going to take over the screen, and we are going to wrap up. Okay, so hopefully you can now see what's next. Oh, no, wait a minute, sorry. Okay, sorry, apologize. I will find you soon, I'm sorry. I've lost my place. There we go. Okay. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Bob, again for a wonderful lecture. Our next one in the Rodgers Tavern Museum Spring Lecture Series is titled Conservation and Ecology of Maryland's River Turtle, the Northern Map Turtle. Maryland's only river turtle, the northern map turtle, is a Maryland endangered species found in the Susquehanna River and its immediate tributaries. Discover the threats they face and efforts to conserve these fascinating turtles, including the population here in Perryville. Dr. Richard Dr. Richard Siegel, Professor Emeritus of the Department of Biological Sciences at Towson University, is our speaker. Please note that this is an in-person only lecture here at the Rodgers Tavern Museum. Registration is required, seating is limited, so please register early. I mean, come on, how could you not want to learn more about something so flipping cute? All right, well, if there are no other questions, then we are going to close out this lecture. So thank you so much, everyone, for attending. It was a great group. Some really good questions. Thank you, Bob, again, for spending the evening with us. Of course, if you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out to the Rodgers Tavern Museum through our website or email, which is rtmuseum@perryvillemd.org. And I look forward to our next lecture. Thank you, everyone, and have a great night.